So recently I made a video about Germany's problematic privacy and media laws, and the reactions were very interesting. From friends of mine who have ties to Germany to German users on Reddit. In general, Germans in particular seemed more incensed by my criticism of the country's media landscape than they were about the cases I was talking about themselves. That video is actually my most disliked video. But I don't understand this pushback. Because let's take the subject of that video, which is this HIV doctor named Heiko Jessen, who got away with abusing his patients for decades. Now, his case has been extended into the fall, and as of the middle of April, a slightly redacted version of the expose about the allegations against him by Vice and BuzzFeed, that's online again. But even if we want to say that these media and privacy laws in Germany are pretty strong, and this particular case of a horribly abusive doctor just fell through the cracks, well, it fell through the cracks in a pretty catastrophic way. Now, acknowledging that isn't an endorsement or rejection of any particular policy, but it should probably tell you that something needs to seriously be changed if such results are possible at all. And not only are they possible, they're regular occurrences. So let's talk about another case of misconduct among doctors. In the city of Bielefeld, a woman had a problem with dizzy spells. In July of 2019, she went to the neurology department at the Evangelical Hospital Bethel and underwent inpatient treatment. Around midnight one night during her stay, a doctor came into a room and said he needed to give her an IV. She lost consciousness soon afterward and woke up with chills and pain in her limbs. So she also found and took a picture of a bottle of an anesthetic in her bed that erases memories. And she reported what happened to a nurse who assured her that the situation would be looked into, which is of course doctor code for we're not going to look into that. As it turned out, she wasn't the only person this happened to. In August of 2019, a month later, another woman who was inpatient at the neurology department reported a doctor coming into her room late at night. When she asked what he was doing, he told her he was gonna give her something that would help her relax. When she woke up, her throat hurt. When she asked the chief doctor about the IV she'd received, he didn't see one noted in her records and released her. So the first woman went back to the hospital again a month later in September of 2019. Her dizzy spells had come back. This time, she had a roommate in her room at the clinic. The same doctor visited both of them late at night. They once again asked what he was doing, and once again he said he was going to give them an IV, supposedly for their MRIs the next day. They lost consciousness, and the next day they informed the chief nurse and the chief doctor what had happened. They tried to convince the woman with the dizzy spells that the temperature of her medicine, apparently it was too warm, was the reason she lost consciousness. But this time, she wasn't having it, so she went to the police and pressed charges against the doctor for aggravated assault because the IVs he'd given her had no justifiable medical purpose. After another woman reported the same doctor in January of the next year, 2020, the chief doctor, finally taking actual action, prohibited him from administering a particular drug, said he was forbidden from doing IVs without a valid medical reason. Are any doctors supposed to do IVs without a valid medical reason? And they said they'd keep an eye on the doctor in question, which again is doctor code for we're not going to keep an eye on that. But the doctor in question still wasn't fired or suspended. As it turns out, this was too little, too late. The doctor had been drugging female patients, sexually assaulting them, and filming his crimes. This was only discovered after the police got a warrant to search the doctor's house 7 months after the woman with dizzy spells pressed charges. The police found 80 videos showing dozens of women being sexually assaulted. So the doctor obviously was arrested. He hanged himself in his cell 2 days after. And the clinic's managing physicians were investigated for being accessories to rape for ignoring the allegations for such a long time. But the responsible prosecuting attorney's office didn't indict anyone at the clinic, and even went as far as to say there was no indication that they should have notified authorities about the doctor. The hospital's directors also said they'd first heard the complaints in September of 2019, 2 months after the woman with dizzy spells took a picture of the bottle in her hospital bed. Where to begin? So obviously, this case is a scandal for many reasons. The hospital ignoring several reports about a doctor administering IVs with very dubious justifications, the painfully slow police investigation of a very serious allegation, and then the fact that the doctor was able to kill himself in custody. But here's where it gets really wacky. In January of 2021, one of the victims saw a report about the scandal in the press and was curious if she'd been one of the victims. She called the police and was regrettably informed that indeed, she had been raped by the doctor in question. This is outrageous, since the doctor also had a sexually transmitted disease. But here's the worst part. Other victims aren't being actively informed because of, wait for it, the post-mortem personality rights of the rapist. That's right, the same police and prosecuting attorneys who utterly failed to protect these women now maintain that the dozens of women he raped have no right to be informed that they were raped, even though they could now have a sexually transmitted disease which would make them infertile, because apparently the rights of the deceased doctor supersede their rights to know about whether or not they had been raped by that doctor. And the reporting can't even mention the doctor's full name or show his picture in the press, even though he's dead anyway. So on the off chance a woman happens to come across this report and realizes she was also a patient at some point, better follow up. That can't happen. Now, there's some terrible stuff in the US, and the principle of innocent until proven guilty exists for a reason. But who is actually being protected here? From my vantage point, in the US, this clinic would be facing multi-million-dollar lawsuits like the University of Michigan did in the wake of Larry Nassar. The Nassar case also resulted in a slew of criminal prosecutions as well as terminations and resignations. In the case of this Bielefeld rapist doctor, he's dead. And there are dozens of women who could end up infertile because of a sexually transmitted disease they didn't even realize they had. To me, this sounds more like stubbornly protecting institutional power than it does protecting the rights of the accused. The poor decisions of a whole host of people in positions of authority need to be questioned publicly in this case, and names should be named in order for there to be an appropriate reckoning. This lack of direct accountability makes it very difficult to hold dysfunctional institutions accountable in Germany. Now, there are some instances of these and similar personality rights laws being used in a way that certainly don't hurt my feelings. In 2014, a black man's children were playing in a park in Herzberg. A German retiree accosted them and hurled racial slurs at them. He was fined 1,800 euros. Sounds pretty cool to me. In 2019, far-right AfD politician Jens Meyer was hit with a huge fine for a racist comment on social media. He posted that Noah Becker, son of tennis star Boris Becker, was a little half N-word. He was ordered to pay 15,000 euro. Okay, I can get down with that. But the Beckers are rich. Often the enforcement of these laws just reinforce existing hierarchies. Besides being used by dysfunctional institutions to stonewall the public, like that Bielefeld doctor I mentioned earlier, Germany's personality rights laws are often used to persecute individuals and activists who challenge the state's power. And one of the worst offenders of this is German police. So in 2010, a black German student took a train heading to Frankfurt. He was arbitrarily racially profiled, stopped, and searched by the federal police. When he refused to identify himself until they would tell him the reason for the check, they took him to the police station and treated him, quote, like an animal. The student told them that their methods reminded him of the SS. And so the student was subsequently charged and convicted of criminal insult. And he sued the police for discrimination, and his lawsuit was initially rejected, and both rulings were eventually overturned. But what happens to people who can't afford the legal costs of a lengthy court battle? Because here's another bizarre and chilling case. During the trial of a right-wing extremist in 2017 in Göttingen, a leftist was demonstrating in front of a court building with the letters FCK BFE on his pullover, which FCK being short for fuck and BFE for a squad from the local police. The officers present claimed they felt insulted by his shirt. They made him take it off, but the one under that shirt had the same letters. The matter went to court, Now, normally, saying fuck the police is not considered an insult in Germany because it's to be understood as a general rejection of the police. So no one in particular can have their personal honor insulted. How generous. But in this case, the argument went like this. Since the defendant knew there would be members of that specific police unit there, a lower court ruled they have the right to have their collective honor protected. Then in 2021, the ruling was upheld by the German Constitutional Court, which is basically the Supreme Court. So you see the way these laws can be used to stifle the left. In 2018, in the German city of Fulda, which, by the way, is the same scandal-ridden police department that railroaded the guy in my last video on Germany for supposedly calling the cops names, even though his recording proved otherwise, but an Afghan refugee was shot by police in Fulda after allegedly throwing rocks at a bakery and attacking a delivery driver. In the aftermath, which led to a slew of articles and demonstrations challenging the official narrative, Fulda's police department used Germany's draconian personality rights laws to systematically harass and intimidate activists and journalists. At demonstrations demanding an independent investigation, one person was charged with criminal defamation for allegedly handing someone a flyer and saying that the police had killed an innocent person. The demonstrator denied the accusation, but that was still enough for a charge. The organizer of a similar demonstration was also charged for not stopping another demonstrator from allegedly yelling into a bullhorn that pigs are racist, the state deports people, and they're a pack of racists. Even worse, Fulda's police chief personally pressed charges against a political scientist who wrote an article about the shooting. The article included the phrase 12 deadly shots. Now, according to the police chief, since technically only 2 of the shots actually killed the refugee, the formulation was designed to mislead people into thinking the police had executed him. But what else do you call that? Therefore, that's criminal defamation. Fulda's police also received a warrant to search the house of a journalist because a member of an anti-racist Facebook group he administered had shared the 12 Deadly Shots article on it. This journalist hadn't read it, he was no longer even active in the Facebook group, but he was criminalized for sharing it, and the police and a judge determined it was illegal enough for a search warrant. The officers threatened to confiscate all of his materials, and the police demanded his Facebook password before deleting the article from his phone. So the point isn't that the laws are always bad. It's that they open the door for arbitrary abuses and repression. And for the people who think, well, I can have people prosecuted for insulting me as well. Well, good luck with that, because getting a prosecutor to take those cases is nearly impossible. They're regularly dismissed because the prosecuting attorney's office has the power to claim there is no public interest in pursuing that case. Insult laws are also very difficult to prove if the accused person simply denies insulting someone. The only time these laws seem reliable is when the person who's insulted is of higher status than the person they're accusing of insulting them. And even if they turn out to be baseless, it's still a huge hassle, also known as flack. These laws are used to selectively harass people, and while I sometimes may like the result, like when a black man successfully presses charges against a white man for calling him the N-word, it doesn't usually work that way. Now, there are lots of problems with free speech in the US. A lot of propagandists are pretty much given free rein to spew bile if they have a huge, viable platform, but bringing criminal charges against people for calling each other names, treating critiques of the police like criminal activity, or protecting the identity of a dead doctor with an STI who raped dozens of female patients, maybe it's time for Germany to rethink its concept of free speech a little bit, because expecting the population to rely so heavily on the integrity of the institutions and so aggressively disciplining those who turn to the media to scrutinize the powerful is pretty authoritarian in my view. But that will be it for me. Special thanks to Jeremy Osborne for writing this video. Any grievances, big or small, can be directed toward him on Twitter, linked below. If you want to support me on Patreon so I can make more of these videos, that would be very much appreciated. And with that, I will see you in the next one.